Imagine striding into court with divorce papers, and your wife walks in late, cradling a newborn, and a DNA envelope that says the baby isn't yours. In minutes, a $3 billion empire starts to crack. Offshore accounts, a mistress who isn't who she seems, an ex-partner who might be dead, or not, and a hospital alarm that turns a custody fight into a hostage standoff. Who's lying? Who's pulling the strings? And when the smoke clears, does a billionaire deserve a second chance? Or is redemption just another deal he can't close? Stick with this episode to see the twists stack, the truth unmask itself, and a father find out what mine really means. If jaw-drop revelations and comeback arcs are your thing, tap, like to boost the story, drop your boldest theory in the comments, share this with a friend who loves high-stakes drama, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next shock. Marcus Sterling adjusted his Italian silk tie for the third time as his armored Bentley pulled up to the Manhattan family courthouse. The morning sun reflected off the building's glass facade like a warning, but Marcus had never been one to heed warnings. At 38, he had built Sterling Technologies from a garage startup into a $3 billion empire, and he hadn't done it by being cautious. "Sir, we're here," his driver announced unnecessarily. Marcus glanced at his Patek Philippe watch. 9:47. Perfect. His legal team would already be inside, having arrived at 9:30 sharp as instructed. His wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, would arrive at 10 according to the court summons. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. He touched the micro recorder hidden beneath his lapel pin, a gift from his mistress, Victoria. Today, he would finally expose Sophia for what she really was. Not the perfect prosecutor-turned-housewife the media loved to photograph at charity galas, but an addict who had been stealing from him for months to fund her habits. The evidence his team had carefully constructed over the past 6 weeks would ensure he got everything: the houses, the investments, and most importantly, full custody of Noah. "Mr. Sterling," a voice called out as he stepped from the car. Reporters, of course. Someone had leaked the divorce filing, probably someone from Sophia's camp, trying to paint her as the victim. Marcus put on his practiced smile, the one that had graced the cover of Forbes 3 times in the past 2 years. "No comment," he said smoothly, his security detail forming a protective barrier as he climbed the courthouse steps. Let them speculate. After today, the truth would be clear enough. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with its usual chaos. Lawyers huddled with clients on worn wooden benches. Children cried while their parents argued over custody arrangements. The fluorescent lighting cast everyone in an unflattering pallor, making even the wealthy look desperate. Marcus had always hated this building. It smelled of fear and broken promises. "Marcus, there you are." Tempest Morrison, his lead attorney, appeared at his elbow. At $2,000 an hour, she was worth every penny. She had never lost a high-profile divorce case. "Everything is ready. The judge has reviewed our preliminary filing, the evidence of substance abuse, the financial irregularities. It's all admissible." "And the other matter?" Marcus asked quietly. "The recordings from the house, already submitted to the judge in chambers. Sophia won't know what hit her." Marcus smiled. For 3 months, he'd been recording every conversation in their Tribeca penthouse, every slurred word after she thought he was asleep, every suspicious phone call to her pharmacy, every time she'd taken money from his wallet. It was all there, time-stamped and verified. "Sir," one of his junior lawyers interrupted, "it's 10:05. She's late." Of course she was. Sophia had been late to everything for the past year, another sign of her deterioration. Marcus settled into his chair at the plaintiff's table, arranging his papers with the same precision he used to arrange hostile takeovers. The courtroom was smaller than he had expected for such a significant case. Wood-paneled walls that had seen better days. A judge's bench that looked like it belonged in a community theater production of 12 Angry Men. At 10:15, Judge Patricia Hawkins entered. Marcus had researched her extensively. 15 years on the bench. Tough, but fair. 3 children of her own. She would understand the importance of protecting a child from an unfit mother. "Good morning," Judge Hawkins said, settling into her chair with the weariness of someone who had already presided over 2 divorces that morning. "I see we're missing—" The courtroom door burst open. Sophia stood in the doorway, but she wasn't alone. In her arms, held against a designer dress that Marcus had bought her for their 3rd anniversary, was a baby. Noah, their 3-month-old son, who was supposed to be with the nanny. But something was wrong with this picture. Sophia wasn't stumbling. Her eyes were clear, sharp even. And in her free hand, she held a manila envelope that she raised like a weapon. "Your Honor," Sophia said, her voice carrying the kind of authority she'd once used to prosecute murderers. "I apologize for my lateness. I had to stop at the hospital to pick up these DNA test results. You see, my husband needs to understand something before we proceed." She walked down the aisle with the confidence of someone who had already won. "This is not his baby." The courtroom fell silent. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face, his carefully constructed composure cracking like ice under pressure. This wasn't possible. He'd been there at the hospital. He'd signed the birth certificate. He'd even chosen the name Noah, after his grandfather. "That's ridiculous," Marcus said, standing abruptly. "Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate—" "Mr. Sterling, you'll have your chance to respond," Judge Hawkins interrupted, her interest clearly piqued. "Mrs. Sterling, please approach the bench." Sophia walked forward, her heels clicking against the floor with metronomic precision. She handed the envelope to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. As Judge Hawkins reviewed the documents, Sophia turned to face Marcus. The look in her eyes wasn't defeat or desperation. It was triumph. "Your Honor," Sophia continued, "I've also brought evidence that Mr. Sterling has been laundering money through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, using our son's college fund as a front." She produced a second envelope thicker than the first. 3 years of transactions, all documented. Marcus's attorney jumped to her feet. "Objection! This is ambush litigation. We haven't had time to review." "You haven't had time?" Sophia laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "I haven't had time to sleep for 3 months, raising this child alone while my husband spent his nights with his mistress." "Oh yes, Marcus, I know about Victoria Cross." The reporters in the gallery began scribbling furiously. Marcus could already see the headlines. His stock price would plummet. The board would call an emergency meeting. Everything he'd built would... However, Judge Hawkins said, looking up from the DNA results, these tests were performed at a private laboratory, not a court-approved facility. "Mr. Sterling, do you consent to a court-ordered paternity test?" "Absolutely," Marcus said quickly. Too quickly, perhaps, but he needed to regain control. "In fact, I insist on it." Sophia's smile widened. "Perfect. And while we're ordering tests, perhaps we should also test for the cocaine residue that I'm sure is still on my husband's desk at his office. You see, Your Honor, the addiction problem in this marriage isn't mine." Marcus felt the micro recorder burning against his chest. This was not how this was supposed to go. He glanced at Tempest, who was rapidly typing on her phone, probably trying to do damage control with her contacts at the Times. "Mrs. Sterling, Judge Hawkins said slowly, these are serious allegations. Do you have proof of these offshore accounts?" "I have everything," Sophia replied. "Bank statements, wire transfers, even recordings of my husband discussing the arrangements with his accountant. Would you like to hear them?" She pulled out her phone, and Marcus recognized it immediately. Not her usual iPhone, but a burner phone he'd never seen before. How long had she been planning this? The first recording played through the courtroom speakers. Marcus's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Make sure it goes through the Noah Foundation. No one questions charity for sick kids. We can move $15 million this quarter alone." "That's taken out of context," Marcus protested, but even he could hear how weak it sounded. "Your Honor," Tempest interjected, "we'd like to present our own evidence. Security footage from the Sterling residence showing Mrs. Sterling removing large sums of money from the safe, clearly intoxicated." "Oh, you mean this footage?" Sophia asked, pulling out an iPad. She swiped to a video, but when it played, it showed something entirely different. It was Marcus in his home office, and he wasn't alone. Victoria Cross was with him, and they were doing more than discussing quarterly reports. But what made Marcus's blood run cold was what happened next in the video. Victoria was going through Sophia's purse, putting something inside. "That's edited," Marcus said quickly. "That's not—" "The metadata says otherwise," Sophia interrupted. "But here's the interesting part. Victoria Cross isn't just your mistress, Marcus. She's been feeding information to your biggest competitor, Whitaker Industries. She's a corporate spy, and you've been pillows hawking your way to bankruptcy. The judge called a 30-minute recess to review the evidence. Marcus stormed into the hallway, his legal team trailing behind him like lost puppies. His phone was buzzing incessantly. Board members, investors, his PR team. He ignored them all and dialed Victoria. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Marcus. He turned to find David Brennan, Sophia's brother, standing by the water fountain. David looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, his hands shaking slightly. The war in Afghanistan had left its marks on him, both visible and invisible. David, Marcus said carefully, I didn't expect to see you here. I need to talk to you privately. Marcus glanced at his lawyers, then nodded toward an empty conference room. Once inside, David began pacing, his movements jerky and agitated. She knows, David said, about the money, about everything. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. For the past year, he'd been paying David $50,000 a month to report on Sophia's activities. It had started innocently enough. David needed money for his gambling debts, and Marcus needed to know if his wife was being faithful. But it had evolved into something darker. How could she know? Marcus demanded. I don't know, man, but she came to my apartment last night. She had photos of us meeting, bank records showing the transfers. She knows I've been spying on her for you. Anne? David laughed bitterly. And she doesn't care. She said she's known for months. She's been feeding me false information to give to you. Everything I told you about her drinking, about the pills, about the affair with her yoga instructor. She planted all of it. Marcus felt the floor shifting beneath him. That's impossible. I saw her myself stumbling around the house. Acting, David interrupted. She took theater classes in college, remember? Before law school, she played you and she used me to do it. So the baby is yours, David confirmed. The day test she has is fake. She had a friend at the hospital lab create it. But here's the thing, she's going to demand a real test knowing you'll agree to it. And when it comes back proving you're the father, she'll use it to show the court that she was willing to lie to protect Noah from you. She'll say she was desperate, that she knew you were dangerous. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. Why are you telling me this? David stopped pacing and looked at him with haunted eyes. Because there's more, something she doesn't know. Victoria Cross, she's not who you think she is. Before David could continue, the door burst open. Tempest stood there, her face pale. Marcus, we have a problem. The FBI is here. Marcus followed her into the hallway where two agents in dark suits were standing with Judge Hawkins. One of them, a woman with sharp features and cold eyes, held up a badge. Mr. Sterling, I'm Special Agent Sarah Collins. We need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Victoria Cross. I want my lawyer present, Marcus said automatically. That's your right, Agent Chen replied. But you should know that Ms. Cross has been cooperating with us for the past 6 months. We have recordings, Mr. Sterling. Lots of recordings. Sophia emerged from the ladies' room, still holding Noah. She looked at the FBI agents with what seemed like genuine surprise. But Marcus was no longer sure what was real and what was performance. Your Honor, Agent Chen addressed Judge Hawkins, we're going to need to postpone these proceedings. This divorce is now evidence in a federal investigation into money laundering, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit fraud. This is insane, Marcus protested. You can't just... He was interrupted by a sound that cut through all the chaos. Noah crying, not the gentle fussing of a sleepy baby, but sharp pained wails that made everyone in the hallway turn. Something's wrong, Sophia said, her performance persona dropping as genuine panic crept into her voice. She bounced Noah gently, but his cries only intensified. Then Marcus saw it, a rash spreading across the baby's face, angry red welts appearing as they watched. He's having an allergic reaction, someone said. Call an ambulance. As chaos erupted in the courthouse hallway, with FBI agents calling for medical assistance and lawyers shouting over each other, Marcus found himself frozen, staring at the infant who might or might not be his son. Noah's tiny face was swelling now, his breathing becoming labored. Sophia looked at him across the chaos, And for just a moment, he saw past all the lies and manipulation. He saw fear, real, raw, maternal fear. "Please," she mouthed to him, "help us." The ambulance ride to Mount Sinai Hospital was a blur of medical terminology and barely controlled panic. Marcus found himself in the back with Sophia and Noah, while the FBI agents followed in their black SUV and the lawyers scattered to regroup. The EMT worked with practiced efficiency, administering epinephrine while monitoring Noah's vitals. "Has he been exposed to any new foods, medications?" the EMT asked. "No, nothing," Sophia insisted, but Marcus noticed her hand trembling as she stroked Noah's hair. "He's only had formula and breast milk. What about environmental factors? New detergent? Perfume?" Sophia shook her head, then suddenly went very still. She looked at Marcus with an expression he couldn't read. "The papers," she whispered. "The divorce papers you filed. I had Noah with me when I was reviewing them this morning. The law firm's letterhead, they use some kind of special coating." "That's impossible," Marcus started to say, but the EMT was already on his radio, relaying information to the hospital. At Mount Sinai, Noah was rushed into the pediatric emergency unit. Marcus and Sophia were relegated to a waiting room that felt like purgatory. White walls, uncomfortable chairs, and a television playing the news on mute. Unfortunately, the closed captions were working perfectly. Sterling Technologies' stock plunges amid FBI investigation and divorce scandal scrolled across the screen, accompanied by a particularly unflattering photo of Marcus from the courthouse steps. "Turn it off," Sophia said quietly. Marcus found the remote and clicked off the TV. They sat in silence for a moment before Sophia spoke again. "The DNA test was real." Marcus Mitchell sat rigid in the molded plastic chair, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his tie hanging limp. He was aware of everything: the buzzing fluorescent lights, the scratch of fabric against his neck, the antiseptic bite of hospital air, but none of it felt real. What was real were Sophia's words, still slicing through the fog like glass. "Noah, he's not your biological son." The sentence didn't just echo, it pulsed like a drumbeat in his skull. At first, his mind had refused to absorb it, instinctively batting it away like a false alarm. But as Sophia's face, ashen, trembling, stayed locked on his, he realized it wasn't a bluff. She wasn't strategizing. She wasn't maneuvering for court. She was confessing. Marcus had prepared himself for lies, for manipulations, even for staged breakdowns. He had not prepared himself for truth. He tried to breathe, but his chest felt too tight. He could almost hear something collapsing inside him, like beams splintering in a burning building. The child he had rocked to sleep, the child he had told bedtime stories to, the child who bore his last name, suddenly, violently, wasn't his. "If he isn't mine, then who am I?" Marcus turned toward the double doors where Noah had been rushed moments ago. A father should be allowed to follow, to hold his son's hand, to promise him it would be okay. But now the word father stuck in Marcus's throat like a shard of bone. He forced himself to glance at Sophia. She sat rigid, her posture defensive, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. Her eyes, red-rimmed and glassy, refused to meet his. He wanted to scream at her, to accuse her of treachery, to demand how long she had known. But he couldn't find the words. His rage was hollow. What lived inside him now wasn't anger. It was vacancy. For a man who had built empires out of control, Marcus Mitchell suddenly felt weightless, as though the ground itself had dropped out beneath him. The doors burst open. David stumbled in first, his face damp with sweat, his movements jerky. Marcus barely processed him, because right behind David was someone who cleaved the room in two, Victoria Cross. Only it wasn't Victoria, not the Victoria he knew. Gone was the tousled golden hair spilling over silk sheets. Gone the wine-red lipstick. Gone the laugh that could disarm him after the most brutal board meeting. In her place stood a woman stripped of artifice, hair slicked back into a severe knot, a black suit cut for precision, not allure. Even her eyes looked different, harder, colder. "Hello, Marcus," she said. Her voice was stripped of the smoky softness he remembered. It was measured, official, a cadence that belonged in a courtroom transcript. Marcus's stomach flipped. He shot to his feet. Your FBI? 3 years undercover. She didn't blink. Your pillow talk was very informative, especially the part about murdering your business partner in Singapore. Marcus's heart stuttered. He heard his own voice, desperate and cracked. That was a figure of speech. I said I wanted to kill the deal, but Victoria cut him off cleanly. We have the body. We found James Whitmore's remains last week, exactly where you told me they'd be. The room tilted. Marcus staggered back a step. His pulse thundered so loud it drowned out everything else. James Whitmore. The name detonated inside him, dragging up memories he had shoved deep underground. Heated arguments in glass-walled offices, a handshake soured into betrayal. The day James vanished without a trace. Marcus had told himself James had fled back to London, humiliated, bitter. But now Victoria, Agent Cross, was standing in front of him, telling him James was dead. And worse, that Marcus himself had confessed to it. Sophia's gasp cracked through the silence like a whip. James is dead? You killed James? Marcus spun toward her, his confusion sharper than his fear. You knew James? Her bitter laugh sent ice through him. Knew him? I was married to him. Before you. Before everything. James is Noah's father. The floor seemed to lurch. The fluorescent lights above blurred. Marcus sank back into his chair because his legs could no longer hold him. He remembered James Whitmore, brilliant and reckless. The partner who'd once promised him they'd revolutionize secure data before the IPO changed everything. He remembered the fights, the ultimatums, and now the revelation that James had not only betrayed him professionally, but had been entwined with Sophia, his wife, his son, his family. Marcus's mind splintered. He wanted to deny it all. He wanted to believe Sophia was lying, that Victoria was bluffing, that this was some elaborate FBI play. But the way Sophia's voice broke, the way Victoria's eyes held no flicker of pretense, made denial impossible. He pressed his palms against his temples. His thoughts spiraled. If James is Noah's father, then my life, my entire life has been one long fraud. And then the memories of Victoria began to surface. Unbidden, savage. The nights they'd shared when she'd curled against him and whispered questions that seemed like affection. What scares you most about James? What would you do if he came back? Where do you think he really went? Marcus had answered them all, believing he was confessing to a lover who craved intimacy, not an operative building a dossier. He remembered the night he'd joked, drunk on scotch, that James would never be found unless someone dragged the lake in Singapore. She had laughed, kissed him, murmured, "Tell me everything." And he had. Marcus's stomach churned. He felt sick, stripped bare, humiliated. Every kiss had been evidence. Every whisper had been surveillance. You set me up, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Victoria didn't flinch. You set yourself up, Marcus. I just wrote it down. Then David's laugh shattered the air, a raw, broken sound that carried too much truth. You want to know what's insane? David rasped, pulling a flask from his coat. None of you know the truth. None of you. Marcus turned to him slowly. His pulse ticked in his ears. If the last 10 minutes had proved anything, it was that truth always had another layer. David, stop, Sophia warned. No, he snapped, his voice rising. I'm done. I'm done being everyone's pawn. He turned to Marcus, his eyes bloodshot, fevered. She knew about James because she helped you kill him. The room erupted. Sophia shot to her feet. That's a lie. Victoria stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Explain that, David. Marcus sat frozen, every nerve firing at once. He didn't know if he wanted David to keep talking or to shut up forever. Because part of him, dark, terrified, knew that David's words, no matter how drunk, might not be a lie. The accusation didn't just hang in the air. It poisoned it. The waiting room's sterile brightness, the hum of fluorescent lights, the antiseptic sting of the hospital, all of it warped into background noise against the words David had unleashed. June 15th, last year, David said, his voice as steady as if he were giving sworn testimony. You called me at 2 a.m. You said there'd been an accident. I drove to that warehouse in Queens. I saw the blood, Sophia. I helped you clean it up. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. Marcus Mitchell sat frozen, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles whitened. He felt like an audience member at a play where everyone else already knew the ending. Only he sat blind, dumb, watching truths detonate around him like grenades. He found his voice, ragged and foreign in his throat. "You killed James?" Sophia spun, her cheeks blotched with red, her eyes wide and wild. "I didn't kill anyone." Her words tumbled out fast, frantic. "He attacked me. He was high on something. He kept saying you wanted him dead, Marcus. He had a knife. It was self-defense." Victoria, standing tall near the doorway, arms folded with the crisp authority of her FBI training, stepped forward. Her tone was pure interrogation, controlled, cutting. "Then why didn't you call the police?" Sophia's voice faltered. Her hand trembled as it clutched Noah's empty carrier like a lifeline. "Because I knew how it would look. The ex-wife, meeting her former husband alone in a warehouse while married to his business partner. They'd never believe me." "So you called your brother," Victoria pressed, "a decorated veteran who knows how to handle violence. And together you buried the truth. Then what? Decided to frame Marcus for it?" Sophia's head whipped back and forth. "No, I didn't frame anyone. I didn't even know he was dead. David told me he'd taken James to a private airfield, that he was entering witness protection because he feared Marcus." All eyes locked on David. He took a long swallow from his flask before speaking, his voice dark, resigned. "I lied. He was gone before I got him out of there. There was no saving him, nothing we could do. So I handled it." Sophia's lips parted soundlessly. "Handled it?" David's eyes clouded, haunted by shadows only he could see. "I called some people I knew, guys I served with overseas, people who know how to make problems disappear. They took the body, they doctored the scene, made it look like Marcus was the culprit. I figured if it ever came to light, it would be his word against forensics." Marcus surged to his feet, every nerve sparking with fury. "Why? Why in God's name would you do that?" David's laugh was hollow, jagged. "Because you were already paying me to watch her, to spy. I thought if I gave you a bigger problem, you'd need me more, pay me more. I could clear my debts, finally crawl out of the mess I was drowning in." Victoria muttered, "You're all insane," then raised her voice, snapping to the FBI agents in the hall. "Take them all in. Everyone here needs to be questioned." Sophia staggered forward, desperation spilling from her voice. "Wait, Noah, my son, he's still being treated. I can't leave him." As if summoned, a doctor in surgical scrubs appeared at the doorway. "Mrs. Sterling?" The chaos froze. "Your son is stable," the doctor said, and Sophia sagged against the chair in relief. "But we discovered something unusual in his blood work. He has a rare genetic condition that requires immediate intervention. We need a transfusion, but neither your blood type nor Mr. Sterling's is compatible." Sophia blinked, uncomprehending. "But I'm his mother. How can I not be compatible?" The doctor shifted uncomfortably. "The tests indicate you are not biologically related to this child." The room shattered into silence. "That's impossible," Sophia shouted. Her hand clawed at her abdomen as if the scars there could prove her claim. "I carried him. I have the stretch marks, the C-section scar. I went through 18 hours of labor." "Nevertheless," the doctor said softly, "the DNA doesn't match yours or Mr. Sterling's. We've tested 3 times. The results are conclusive." Marcus's chest hollowed, his voice barely audible. "Then whose child is he?" The doctor glanced at his tablet. "We can't say without comparative samples. But what matters now is finding a compatible donor. His condition is worsening." David straightened. "Test me. Just test me, all right?" The doctor nodded, motioning for him to follow. The heavy door closed behind them, sealing the room in a suffocating silence. Sophia collapsed into a chair, her eyes glassy. "I don't understand. I felt him kick. I held him. He's mine." Victoria, softer now, said, "Sometimes babies get switched in hospitals. It's rare, but it happens." Her phone rang, slicing through the fragile quiet. She answered, listening, her posture stiffening. When she spoke, her face had gone pale. "There's been an incident at the courthouse. Someone detonated an explosive in the evidence room. Every piece of physical evidence from the Sterling case. It's gone. Marcus felt a strange duality tear through him. Relief at his potential reprieve. Dread at what the escalation meant. Someone out there was fighting to bury the truth, and they weren't in this room. He turned to Victoria. Who else knew about the evidence? Before she could answer, the lights flickered. The intercom system blared. Code Silver, armed intruder. This is not a drill. Not. Marcus's blood iced. Code Silver, armed gunman in the hospital. The doctor's words had detonated fresh shockwaves, but Marcus's mind snagged on something earlier. David's description of that night in Queens. It replayed like a grim theater, each detail unfolding in slow motion. The warehouse had been abandoned, its windows shattered, its concrete floors slick with oil and dust. James, Marcus's former business partner, his rival, his brother-in-law, had been spiraling for months. Drugs, paranoia, threats muttered in late-night calls. Sophia had gone to meet him, she later claimed, to calm him down. The scene, as David pieced it together later, was chaos. James raving, knife flashing in the dark. Sophia pleading. A shove. A fall. The blade catching flesh. David said she was screaming when he arrived. Blood pooled beneath James, thick and black in the dim light. He was still breathing then, ragged, wet gasps that rattled in the cavernous space. Sophia's hands had been crimson, shaking as she pressed them to the wound. He attacked me. He said Marcus wanted me dead. I didn't mean... David, I didn't mean... James's eyes had fixed on David as he entered, glassy with fear and fury. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. Moments later, he was still. David's training had kicked in. Assess the threat. Neutralize panic. Cover the tracks. He'd pulled Sophia to her feet, barked at her to stop crying, told her to go home and burn her clothes. Then he called in favors from men who didn't ask questions, men who worked in shadows. By dawn, the warehouse was scrubbed, the body gone, the narrative already being spun. To Sophia, David had painted a softer lie, James whisked away into witness protection, hidden from Marcus's reach. It was cleaner, easier for her to swallow than the truth. But to Marcus now, hearing the admission, the betrayal cut to the bone. Not only had James been killed, not only had Sophia hidden it, his own brother-in-law had engineered the evidence to fall on him. Back in the waiting room, Marcus's heart pounded, his thoughts colliding in a storm of betrayal and fear. His marriage, his child, his reputation, all of it built on lies, now crumbling. The FBI agents moved closer, weapons drawn as the hospital alarm echoed. Victoria barked orders, but Marcus barely heard. He thought of James bleeding out on that warehouse floor. He thought of Sophia's hands, slick with blood, and he thought of the baby down the hall, the child he'd rocked to sleep, whose DNA said he wasn't a father at all. The unraveling truth was no longer just about guilt or innocence. It was about survival. The FBI agents immediately went into tactical mode, hands moving to their concealed weapons as they began herding everyone away from the windows. Victoria spoke rapidly into her radio while her partner secured the waiting room door. "David," Sophia said suddenly. "Where's David?" He'd been gone for less than 5 minutes for the blood test, but in the case, no one had been watching the exits. Marcus pulled out his phone, trying to call David's number, but there was no answer. "Everyone remain calm," Victoria commanded, though her own voice was tight with tension. "Hospital security is handling..." The lights went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Then they heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, heavy and purposeful. The door to the waiting room exploded inward. David stood in the doorway, but he wasn't alone. In his arms was Noah, pulled from whatever treatment room he'd been in. The baby was awake but quiet, his eyes wide with what looked like recognition. David was holding a gun. "Nobody move," he said, his voice different now. Calmer, more controlled. The shaking hands from earlier were steady as rock. "David, what are you doing?" Sophia whispered. "Put Noah down, please." "I'm done being everyone's fool," David replied. He moved into the room, keeping his back to the wall, the gun sweeping across the assembled group. "You all thought I was just the damaged veteran with PTSD and gambling debts, the useful idiot, but I've been playing a longer game than any of you. David, you're sick, Sophia said, trying to use her prosecutor voice, the one that had once commanded courtrooms. The war, it changed you. We can get you help. David laughed. The war didn't change me, sis. It revealed me. Do you know what I did in Afghanistan? My real job? I wasn't just a soldier. I was an intelligence officer. I learned how to manipulate assets, run operations, make people believe whatever I needed them to believe. Then why? Marcus asked. Why all of this? Because James Whitmore wasn't just your business partner, Marcus. He was my handler, CIA. We were investigating you for selling military technology to foreign entities through Sterling Technologies. But you got suspicious, didn't you? Started asking questions. So James had to die, or appear to. Victoria stepped forward slightly. You're saying James Whitmore was CIA? Was? David smiled coldly. Who says he's dead? As if on cue, another figure appeared in the doorway. Marcus recognized him instantly, though he looked different, thinner, scarred, but very much alive. James Whitmore stepped into the room and Sophia made a sound like all the air had been punched from her lungs. Hello, darling, James said to her. Miss me? You're supposed to be dead, Sophia breathed. The blood, the warehouse. Pig's blood, James replied casually. Very convincing, though. David here is quite the stage manager. You should have seen your face that night. But the body the FBI found, a John Doe from the morgue with similar build and my dental records swapped in. It's amazing what you can accomplish with the right connections. Marcus's mind was reeling. So this whole thing, the divorce, the FBI investigation, everything, it's all been what? Some elaborate operation? James smiled. Oh, the divorce is real. Your wife really does hate you, Marcus, and you really did commit all those financial crimes. We just facilitated the revelation. Though I must admit, finding out Noah was mine was a surprise. I didn't know about that night with Sophia until the day test results came through our surveillance. Our surveillance? Sophia asked. Oh yes, James continued. Every room in your houses, your offices, your cars. We've been watching you both for 2 years. Did you really think your marriage fell apart naturally? We pushed every button, exploited every weakness. Marcus's ego, Sophia's loneliness. Even Victoria here. Actually, Victoria interrupted. I really am FBI. And you've just confessed to multiple federal crimes, Mr. Whitmore. James laughed. Have I? Good luck proving any of it. In about 3 minutes, this entire hospital is going to lose power. In the chaos, David and I are going to disappear with Noah and $50 million in cryptocurrency that Marcus so helpfully accumulated in those offshore accounts. Accounts that I've had access to since day one. You can't just take him, Sophia protested. He's sick. He needs medical treatment. Which he'll receive, James assured her, from the best doctors money can buy. In a non-extradition country, of course. Marcus stepped forward. You're not taking that child anywhere. David swung the gun toward him. You want to bet your life on that? The red emergency lighting made everyone look like characters in a nightmare, their faces painted in shadows and crimson. Noah had started to cry, soft whimpers that seemed to echo in the tense silence. Please, Sophia begged. He needs his medication. The allergic reaction was induced, James interrupted. A harmless compound that creates dramatic symptoms but no lasting damage. We needed a distraction to get everyone to the hospital, away from the courthouse and its security. You poisoned a baby? Victoria asked, disgust evident in her voice. I protected my son from a toxic situation, James corrected. Do you know what would have happened to him raised by these two? A workaholic sociopath and a woman so desperate for love, she married her ex-husband's business partner? That's enough, a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. A woman stood there, but in the red lighting, it took Marcus a moment to recognize her. When he did, his blood went cold. It was Victoria, except Victoria was still standing next to him. This new woman looked exactly like her, down to the FBI suit and the severe hairstyle. Hello, sister, the new Victoria said to the original. The Victoria next to Marcus, the one he'd known for months, stared at her double in shock. Vanessa, you're supposed to be dead. You died in that fire 10 years ago. The fire you set, Vanessa asked, stepping into the room. The one that killed our parents while I was inside? Yes, I remember that fire quite well. It was an accident, Victoria protested. The investigation proved the investigation proved what I wanted it to prove, Vanessa interrupted. I survived, obviously, spent 6 months in a burn unit under a Jane Doe classification. When I finally healed, I had a choice. Come back to the sister who tried to kill me, or disappear and plot something better. Sophia looked between the two identical women. You're twins? Identical, Vanessa confirmed. Very useful for my purposes. You see, while Victoria here was building her FBI career, I was building something else. A network of people wronged by those in power. David here, abandoned by the country he served. James, whose CIA handlers threw him to the wolves when his cover was threatened. And you've been what? Pulling all our strings? Marcus asked. Every single one, Vanessa confirmed. I approached David first years ago, helped him with his debts in exchange for information about his sister. Then I found James, supposedly dead, actually hiding in witness protection. I offered him a better deal. Help me destroy Marcus Sterling and reclaim his son. But why? Marcus demanded. What did I ever do to you? Vanessa laughed. You really don't remember, do you? 10 years ago, a young woman came to you with a startup idea, a revolutionary app that would change how people communicate. You stole it, built Sterling Technologies on it, and when she tried to sue, you destroyed her. That woman was me, Marcus, under another name, of course. Marcus searched his memory. 10 years ago, there had been so many pitches, so many desperate entrepreneurs. Rebecca Clark, he said suddenly. You're Rebecca Clark. Was, Vanessa corrected. She died in that fire along with Victoria's parents, or so everyone believed. Victoria, the real FBI agent Victoria, had her hand on her service weapon. Vanessa, you're under arrest for conspiracy, kidnapping. Am I? Vanessa produced a device from her pocket. This is a dead man's switch. If I release it, the explosive vest that David and James are wearing will detonate, along with the one I placed in the pediatric IQ. Everyone froze. David looked down at his chest in shock, apparently unaware of this part of the plan. James, however, just smiled. You're bluffing, Victoria said. I burned alive once, Vanessa replied. I've got nothing left to fear. But you've got everything to lose. Your career, your freedom, these people you're supposed to protect. The hospital's main power suddenly failed completely. Even the emergency lighting flickered. In the darkness, there was a sound of movement, a baby's cry, and then the lights came back on. David was on the ground, blood spreading from a gunshot wound to his shoulder. James had Noah and was backing toward the door. Vanessa still held the dead man's switch, and Victoria had her gun drawn, smoke rising from the barrel. I couldn't let you hurt him, Victoria said to David. He's my nephew. Another shocking revelation. Marcus felt like his head might explode from trying to process everything. Nephew? Sophia gasped. Victoria nodded, keeping her gun trained on Vanessa. James is my half-brother, different mothers, same father. I joined the FBI to find out what happened to him when he disappeared. When I was assigned to investigate Marcus, I couldn't believe the coincidence. There are no coincidences, Vanessa said. I arranged for you to be assigned to this case. I knew about your connection to James. I knew you'd do anything to protect his son. The standoff in the hospital waiting room had reached a critical point. David was bleeding on the floor, James held Noah near the exit, Vanessa controlled the explosives, and Victoria kept her weapon trained on her twin sister. Marcus and Sophia stood frozen between them all, pawns in a game whose rules kept changing. Here's what's going to happen, Vanessa announced. James is going to walk out with Noah. No one is going to follow. In exchange, I won't level this hospital. You're not a killer, Victoria said. Even after everything, you wouldn't murder innocent people. Wouldn't I? Vanessa's scarred hand tightened on the device. I've been legally dead for 10 years. I've watched you all from the shadows, seen how you've wasted your lives on petty grievances and power plays. Marcus destroyed my company. You destroyed our family. Sophia destroyed her marriage. David destroyed his soul in a war for oil. We're all killers here, sister. I'm just the only one honest about it. Please, Sophia stepped forward. Take me instead. Let Noah stay here where he can get medical help. I'll go with you as a hostage. James laughed. You're worthless to us now. No, we're taking my son and we're disappearing. New identities, new country, new life. The 50 million from Marcus's accounts will ensure we live very comfortably. Except you can't access those accounts, Marcus said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. He pulled out his phone showing a banking app. I froze them 20 minutes ago when I realized what was happening. Dual authentication with biometric locks. You need both my retinal scan and my thumbprint. In person at specific bank locations. You've got nothing. James's confident expression faltered. You're lying. Am I? Check for yourself. Vanessa pulled out a tablet, typed rapidly, then cursed. He's right. The accounts are locked. Then unlock them, James demanded, pointing at Marcus. Not until you give us Noah, Marcus countered. You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Vanessa reminded him, waving the dead man's switch. Neither are you, a new voice said from the hallway. Judge Patricia Hawkins walked into the room, but she wasn't dressed in her robes. She wore tactical gear with FBI emblazoned across the chest. Behind her, a full SWAT team had taken position. Hello, Rebecca, Judge Hawkins said to Vanessa. Or should I say Vanessa? I've been tracking you for 3 years. Vanessa's composure cracked. Patricia? But you're a judge. Who moonlights with the FBI's domestic terrorism unit, Hawkins replied. Did you really think your network was so secret? We've been monitoring you since you first contacted David. We knew about James, about the fake death, about this entire operation. Then why didn't you stop it? Victoria demanded, still processing that her boss had been undercover this entire time. Because we needed to expose the whole network, Hawkins explained. Vanessa, James, and their associates have been planning something much bigger than just revenge on Marcus Sterling. They've been positioning themselves to take down multiple Fortune 500 companies using similar tactics. This was our chance to catch them all. But Noah, Sophia started, was never in real danger, Hawkins assured her. We switched the allergen compound with a harmless irritant. The medical emergency was real enough to maintain the ruse, but controlled. You used my son as bait? Sophia's voice rose with fury. We protected your son while capturing domestic terrorists, Hawkins corrected. Speaking of which, she turned to Vanessa, the dead man's switch is a fake. We intercepted your explosives last night and replaced them with decoys. You can press that button all you want. Vanessa laughed bitterly and released the switch. Nothing happened. It's over, Hawkins said. James Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and kidnapping. Vanessa Cross, or whatever you're calling yourself today, you're under arrest for domestic terrorism, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 30 other charges I'll let the attorneys sort out. Wait, Marcus said, what about us? Sophia and I, the divorce, the accusations. Hawkins looked at him with something like pity. Mr. Sterling, your financial crimes are very real. The FBI has been building a case against you for 2 years. Mrs. Sterling, while you were unaware of most of this conspiracy, you did help cover up what you believed was a death. You'll both need excellent lawyers. As the SWAT team moved in to make arrests, Noah started crying again. But this time it was different, not pain or fear, but simple baby frustration at being held by a stranger. James looked down at the child he claimed was his son, then did something unexpected. He walked over to Sophia and gently placed Noah in her arms. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for everything. I convinced myself I was protecting him, but I was just using him like everyone else. Sophia clutched Noah to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Is he even yours? James shook his head. I don't know anymore. Does it matter? You're his mother. That's what counts. As the conspirators were led away in handcuffs, Marcus found himself standing next to Sophia and Noah. His empire was crumbling. His freedom was in jeopardy, and everything he'd built was turning to ash. But watching Sophia comfort Noah, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. I'm sorry, he said to Sophia, for all of it, for choosing work over family, for the affairs, for becoming someone neither of us recognizes. Sophia looked at him, exhausted but somehow still standing. I'm sorry too, for the lies, for the manipulation, for losing myself in this marriage. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now? Sophia adjusted Noah in her arms. Now we face the consequences. Separately. But maybe, if we're very lucky, we learn to be better people for him. 6 months later, the Manhattan Federal Courthouse was once again the stage for the Sterling family drama, but this time it was criminal proceedings rather than divorce court. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, his orange jumpsuit a far cry from his Italian suits. He'd been denied bail as a flight risk, spending the past months in federal detention. Sophia sat in the gallery, Noah in her arms. She'd been sentenced to 18 months of house arrest with community service for her role in covering up what she thought was James's death. It was lenient, considering, but then again, she'd turned state's witness against everyone else. The trial had been a media circus. Every major news outlet covered the billionaire baby swap conspiracy, as they dubbed it. The truth that had finally emerged was somehow both simpler and more complex than anyone had imagined. Noah was, in fact, Marcus and Sophia's biological child. The DNA test had been fabricated by Vanessa as part of the psychological warfare. But the truth about everything else, the money laundering, the corporate espionage, the murder that wasn't a murder, had destroyed lives and fortunes. Marcus had pled guilty to financial crimes that would put him away for 7 to 10 years. His company had been dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay fines and restitution. The man who'd once commanded boardrooms now commanded nothing but a small cell and 3 meals a day. As the judge read the formal sentencing, Marcus found himself looking back at Sophia and Noah. The baby, now 9 months old, was standing with support from his mother, those familiar gray eyes looking around the courtroom with curiosity. When Noah spotted Marcus, he smiled and babbled something that sounded almost like dada. Marcus felt his throat tighten. By the time he got out of prison, Noah would be in elementary school. He'd miss first steps, first words, first day of school, all the moments he'd previously dismissed as unimportant compared to closing deals. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, drawing his attention back, "do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Marcus stood slowly. 6 months ago, he would have had a speech prepared by the best writers money could buy. Now he simply spoke from his heart. "I spent my entire adult life believing that success meant having power over others," he said. "I destroyed competitors, betrayed partners, and neglected my family, all in service of building an empire. But empires built on lies always fall. I've lost everything, my company, my fortune, my freedom. But the truth is, I lost the most important things long before the FBI knocked on my door. I lost them the day I chose ambition over love." He turned to look at Sophia again. "I don't ask for forgiveness. Some things can't be forgiven. But I want my son to know that his father finally understood, too late, what really mattered." The judge nodded. 7 years, with possibility of parole in 5. Court is adjourned. As the bailiffs prepared to lead Marcus away, Sophia stood up. "Wait," she called out. Everyone turned to look at her. She walked forward, Noah in her arms, until she was close enough to the defendant's table that Marcus could see his son clearly. "Noah," she said softly, "say goodbye to Daddy." The baby reached out his chubby hand toward Marcus. The bailiff, an older man who'd probably seen every kind of family tragedy, quietly allowed Marcus to step forward and touch his son's hand. "Be good for Mommy," Marcus whispered. Noah gurgled happily and grabbed Marcus's finger with surprising strength, holding on as if he understood this was important. "Time to go," the bailiff said gently. As Marcus was led away, he heard Noah start to cry, not the sharp wails of pain or fear, but the confused whimper of a child who didn't understand why someone was leaving. It was a sound that would haunt Marcus through every day of his sentence. The minimum security prison in Otisville, New York, had a small visitor's room with painted concrete walls trying to look cheerful. Marcus sat at a plastic table, his hair now more gray than black, wearing the khaki uniform that had replaced his orange jumpsuit 2 years ago when he'd been transferred. He was reading a book about child psychology when the door opened. He looked up, expecting his lawyer with papers to sign for his upcoming parole hearing. Instead, Sophia walked in, and beside her, holding her hand, was a 5-year-old boy with familiar gray eyes and a mischievous smile. Marcus stood so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. He hadn't seen them in 2 years. Sophia had brought Noah a few times during the first year, but then the visits had stopped. She'd sent letters explaining that it was too confusing for Noah, too hard to explain why Daddy lived in a place with bars on the windows. "Hi, Marcus," Sophia said softly. "Sophia, I didn't know you were coming." "Noah asked," she replied. "He's been asking about you. He found some old photos and wanted to know who the man was with Mommy." Marcus looked at his son, who was studying him with the intense concentration children reserve for puzzles. "Hi, Noah. Are you my dad?" Noah asked directly, with the blunt honesty only a 5-year-old could manage. "Yes," Marcus said simply. "I am. Why don't you live with us?" Marcus glanced at Sophia, who nodded slightly. They'd clearly discussed how to handle this question. "I made some bad choices," Marcus explained, kneeling down to be at Noah's eye level. "When you make bad choices, sometimes there are consequences. I had to come here to learn how to make better choices." Noah considered this. "Like when I had time out for hitting Bradley at school?" "Something like that," Marcus agreed, surprised to find himself smiling. "But longer." "Are you almost done learning?" Noah asked hopefully. "Almost," Marcus said, "maybe in a few more months." Noah suddenly rushed forward and hugged Marcus around the neck. Marcus froze, then slowly, carefully put his arms around his son. He could feel how much Noah had grown, how solid and real he was. He smelled like graham crackers and playground sand. "I drew you pictures," Noah said, pulling back and producing a folder from his small backpack. "Mommy said you might want them for your room." Marcus opened the folder to find dozens of drawings, houses with too many windows, stick figures under enormous suns, a purple dog that might have been a horse. Each one was labeled in Sophia's neat handwriting with the date and what Noah had said about it. "This one's you and me and Mommy," Noah explained, pointing to 3 stick figures holding hands. "At the park, when you come home." Marcus had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. "It's perfect. Thank you." They spent the next hour together, Noah chattering about kindergarten, his best friend Jake, the hamster that had briefly lived in their apartment before going to hamster heaven. Marcus listened to every word, trying to memorize the sound of his son's voice, the way he gestured with his hands when excited, the little crease between his eyebrows when he was thinking hard about something. "Time's almost up," the guard announced. Noah's face fell. "But we just got here." "I know, buddy," Sophia said, "but we'll come back soon." "Promise?" Noah asked. "Promise," Sophia confirmed. She looked at Marcus. "Your parole hearing is in 3 months. Your lawyer says it looks good." "I know," Marcus said. "I've been taking every program they offer. Anger management, financial ethics, even a parenting class." Sophia smiled slightly. "A parenting class?" "It's never too late to learn," Marcus said. "At least, that's what I keep telling myself." As they prepared to leave, Noah turned back. "Dad, when you come home, can we go to the park? The one with the big slides?" "Every day if you want," Marcus promised. After they left, Marcus returned to his cell with Noah's drawings. His cellmate, a former hedge fund manager, doing time for insider trading, looked at the stick figures with amusement. "Kid's got no artistic talent," he observed. "He's perfect," Marcus replied, carefully taping each drawing to the wall beside his narrow bunk. That night, as he lay in bed looking at Noah's artwork, Marcus thought about the strange journey that had brought him here. He'd lost an empire worth billions. But in that visiting room, holding his son, he'd felt richer than he ever had in his corner office overlooking Manhattan. 3 months later, Marcus stood before the parole board. They asked him about his crimes, his rehabilitation, his plans for the future. He answered honestly, without the smooth polish that had once convinced investors to trust him with millions. "I'm not the same man who built Sterling Technologies," he told them. "That man believed he was invincible, that rules didn't apply to him. Prison has taught me humility. Losing my family taught me priorities. I don't want to build another empire. I just want to be a father." 2 weeks after that, Marcus walked out of Otisville with a single bag containing his few possessions and Noah's drawings. Sophia was waiting in the parking lot, Noah beside her, bouncing with excitement. "Daddy!" Noah shouted, running toward him. Marcus caught him and lifted him up, spinning him around while Noah laughed with pure joy. When he set Noah down and looked at Sophia, he saw something in her eyes he hadn't expected. Not love, that was gone, destroyed by years of betrayal and neglect, but perhaps forgiveness. perhaps hope. Ready to go home? Sophia asked. Where's home? Marcus asked, realizing he had no idea where he would live. We'll figure it out, Sophia said, one day at a time. As they drove away from the prison, Noah chattering from the back seat about everything Marcus needed to see and do. Marcus understood that his real sentence hadn't been the 5 years in prison. It had been the decades he'd spent imprisoned by his own ambition, unable to see what truly mattered. Now, finally, he was free. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. He had no money, no reputation, no company to run. He'd have to find work, probably something humble and far removed from the boardrooms he'd once commanded. He and Sophia would have to navigate co-parenting without the love that had once connected them. But as Noah reached forward from the back seat to hold his father's hand, Marcus knew he had something more valuable than any acquisition or merger. He had a second chance, and this time, he wouldn't waste it. 1 year after Marcus's release, Central Park was dressed in autumn colors. The leaves crunched under their feet as Noah ran ahead on the path, his jacket bright red against the golden foliage. "Don't go too far," Sophia called out. "I won't, Mom," Noah called back, already distracted by a particularly interesting stick that clearly needed immediate investigation. Marcus and Sophia walked side by side, not touching but comfortable in each other's presence. They'd found a rhythm over the past year. Marcus had a small apartment 6 blocks from Sophia's. He worked as a financial literacy counselor at a nonprofit, helping former inmates manage money after release. The salary was less than he used to spend on lunch, but it felt like meaningful work. His teacher says he's doing well, Sophia mentioned, reading above grade level. He gets that from you, Marcus replied. The intelligence, I mean. He gets the determination from you, Sophia countered. Did you see him at soccer practice? He fell 3 times trying to make that goal, but he kept getting up. They watched Noah pick up leaves, examining each one, before either pocketing it or tossing it aside based on some 6-year-old's criteria they couldn't fathom. I've been thinking, Sophia said suddenly, about forgiveness. Marcus looked at her, surprised. They'd carefully avoided heavy emotional topics, keeping things light and focused on Noah. I spent so long being angry, she continued, at you, at myself, at the whole situation. But holding on to that anger, it was like carrying poison. It was killing me slowly. Sophia, let me finish, she interrupted gently. I'm not saying we can go back. Too much happened, too much was broken. But maybe we can build something new. Not as husband and wife, but as Noah's parents. As friends even. Marcus felt something ease in his chest, a tension he'd carried for so long, he'd forgotten it was there. I'd like that, he said simply. Dad, Mom, look! Noah came running back, holding a perfect red maple leaf. Can we save it? Of course, Marcus said, carefully taking the leaf. We'll press it in a book when we get home. Cool. Can we get hot chocolate? Noah asked hopefully. Sophia checked her watch. It's 3 in the afternoon. Please? Noah deployed his most effective weapon, puppy dog eyes that could melt glaciers. Marcus and Sophia exchanged a look, and in that moment of shared parental amusement, something shifted. Not a rekindling of old love, but perhaps the beginning of something new. Something built on truth rather than pretense, on acceptance rather than ambition. Fine, Sophia conceded, but just 1 marshmallow. 3 marshmallows, Noah negotiated. 2, Marcus countered. Deal. Noah grabbed both their hands, pulling them toward the park cafe. As they walked together, Noah between them swinging on their arms and chattering about everything and nothing, Marcus thought about the strange turns life could take. He'd entered a courthouse with divorce papers, ready to destroy his family for the sake of his pride. He'd lost everything he thought mattered. But in losing it all, he'd found what truly counted. The FBI investigation had revealed many lies. The conspiracy had shown how far people would go for revenge and power. The trials had exposed the dark underbelly of ambition and greed. But here, in a park on an autumn afternoon with his son's laughter echoing off the trees, and his ex-wife beside him, Marcus Sterling had found something none of his billions could have bought. He'd found redemption, and more importantly, he'd found his way home. Not to a penthouse or a corporate empire, but to the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of being a father, of being human, of being present for the small moments that, added together, make a life worth living. As Noah ran ahead again, chasing a squirrel that had no intention of being caught, Sophia smiled. "What?" Marcus asked. "Nothing," she said. "Just, this is nice." "Yeah, Mushkin," Marcus agreed, watching his son explore the world with wonder he'd somehow forgotten existed. "It really is." The squirrel escaped up a tree and Noah came running back, already onto the next adventure. There would be homework later and dinner to make and all the mundane challenges of daily life. Marcus would go to his small apartment, video call Noah before bed, and prepare for another day at the nonprofit. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't the life he'd thought he wanted. But as Noah grabbed his hand again, sticky with something that was probably definitely not just dirt, Marcus realized it was exactly the life he needed. The billionaire who had entered the courthouse with divorce papers was gone. In his place stood a father, imperfect but present, broken but healing, learning every day that the greatest fortune wasn't measured in dollars but in moments. And this moment, walking through Central Park with the family he'd almost lost, was worth more than all the empires in the world.